Good to have you join us. Very happy to have you. I'm curious
Nice to be here.
as to how you would modify your agenda for change, or how would you even begin to advise it be put into practice at a time of coronavirus when we're seeing the most disadvantaged even more disadvantaged?
Well, precisely. I think what the coronavirus has exposed is several weaknesses in our economic structure, weaknesses that I talked about in my book, but I think they've never been clearer. Two examples are the one that you just mentioned, that the way our economic system has been working has created enormous amounts of inequality. This is particularly true in the United States, where there are not only income and wealth inequalities, but very large inequalities in health. And this nasty virus goes after particularly those who have weak health conditions. So the death rate among those who are lower income compared to higher income has just been enormous. This has not been an equal opportunity virus. It's really targeted the poor. But the second thing that this crisis has brought out so clearly is, in a time of crisis, we turn to government. And if we've developed a strong capacity in the public sector, then we're better able to respond. And unfortunately, in the United States, for the last 40 years, we've undermined the state. I mean, it's remarkable in the last 3 years. We've undermined the state capacity to respond, particularly to crises. We underfunded the CDC. We disbanded the White House Office of Pandemics. We let the stockpiles of necessary healthcare facilities not be replenished. We didn't maintain the ventilators in the stockpiles. You couldn't describe a worse behavior in terms of preparation on by the government for this kind of crisis. So a major theme of my book is that the kinds of reforms we need going forward, and this was written before the pandemic, is a better balance between the market and the state and civil society, all of which play an important role in how our society functions.
So to that point, the measures already put in place by the Fed and the Treasury, do you see those as good steps forward? We just saw an airlines quote-unquote bailout as well that many of them are taking advantage of. And I know that you floated the idea of, a super Chapter 11 type process during crises in the past. I'm curious, would you want that also brought into this system? And if so, would you even extend it to the most distressed systemic parts of the economy, like retailers?
Well, first, I think you have to give them credit for responding strongly. The $2 trillion is a lot of money, no matter how you look at it. But the deficiencies in the design of the program and in the administrative capacities of the Trump administration have really been exposed. The difference in the unemployment rate in the United States and in many European countries like Denmark, UK, France is enormous. And, of course, that means that large numbers of very vulnerable people are bearing the brunt of this crisis. But the second thing is we're having difficulty channeling money even into the business sectors and the productive sectors of the economy where it's needed. And what worries me is that when it comes time for when the pandemic is put under control, we don't know when that's going to be, the U.S. economy may not be in as good position to have a strong recovery. And what I'm thinking about are things like this. Households and firms will see a significant erosion in their net worth. There will be lots of arrears in debt. People are now beginning to worry about a bankruptcy cascades. And all of those are things we've seen in the past, should have been worried about avoiding it in the worst crises, no matter what the shock is. If you don't do this, you can wind up in a kind of paralysis, and that's where my Super Chapter 11 comes in, that the ordinary procedures for addressing bankruptcies, people who can't make their liabilities, are too slow. They take years. In the case of Lehman Brothers, it took years and years. But in the East Asia crisis, we saw 50, 60, 70% of the firms not being able to pay their debts. And if you went through this on a one-by-one basis, you'd be dealing with from now to kingdom come. So what you need to do is to have an expedited process, a Super Chapter 11. And that's what I advocated in the East Asia crisis. And I think we may be, I hopefully not, in a situation where we'll have to revive that idea. If we had actually been able to channel the money to the companies that needed it, we would have avoided that. But I'm not sure we were able to do that.
Professor Stiglitz, Guy in London, Amazon stock is up 23% so far this year. Do you think Amazon should be paying its workers more? And do you think shareholders are fully factored in that that could be a possibility?
I do think that they should be paying their workers more. In a lot of the service sectors where there were not unions, they were not even providing protective gear. They're providing essential services to us, but they're left undefended. I know here in New York, the unions have been very strong in demanding that people in these areas get protective gear, masks, so that they don't come down with the disease. So I think what is clear is that there's an asymmetry in bargaining power. That goes back to the issue of inequality. And unfortunately, some of our richest companies have taken advantage of that asymmetry in bargaining power in ways really to mistreat their workers. And it's in a way unconscionable, given the profits that they're making, that they don't treat their workers better. It's also the case that they ought to be paying more taxes. These companies who've been very clever in designing good products, coming up with good business models, have also been very clever in avoiding their share of taxes. And now is a time where we really do need that tax revenue for public purpose.
I'm sure Amazon would argue that it treats its people fairly and that it looks after them. Let's talk a little bit about what is happening here in Europe. Professor Stiglitz, we have a situation where it looks unlikely that there is going to be any debt mutualization within the Eurozone. We've got a BTP Bund spread that is widening out significantly as the market starts to factor this in. Do you think the Eurozone can survive without debt mutualization? Because Italy is going to be taking an awful lot on its shoulders.
Yeah, I think that this may be a critical, you might say, negative decision for the European project. There was already in Italy a lot of skepticism about the European project. The euro had not worked well. It had for Italy, it had been one of the reasons that their growth has been so anemic. Not the only, but clearly, if they had had more flexibility in the exchange rate, they could have done a lot better. And if there had been more flexibility in the rules, they could have done a lot better. Mm-hmm. So in the absence of that, you say, well, where is the solidarity? We're paying a high price for the European project, which was about solidarity, and now we have a crisis, and there's no evidence of solidarity. So I think this may be a very dark moment for the future of Europe.